Thomason, and I am here with Dr. Josh Bowen, who is from the Digital Hammurabi group, and he also appears occasionally, or actually more than occasionally, kind of frequently, on Skylar Fiction's channel. And I think that's where I first met him, but I'm not completely sure. And we've gone back and forth a few times on Twitter, and we've gone back and forth sometimes on YouTube. And so this is the first time that I've been on a call with Josh, and so I'm pretty excited about that. And so without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce Josh.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. I think it's gonna be fun. So yeah, I'm Josh Bowen. I run Digital Hammurabi with my wife Megan, and she really does all the work, but which is good. And because the quality is good, then you see if she does it. But no, we do a lot of ancient Near Eastern stuff and some Bible stuff, and yeah, just trying to bring good scholarship to people that haven't been able to go to get an advanced degree or something. So yeah, that's kind of what we do, and I have a lot of fun with it. So hopefully, we can talk about some of that stuff today and have some fun with it. So
Yeah.
It's neat to talk about the ancient world. So
I love talking about the ancient world because I know so little about it. So it's like a learning process for me, so I can learn more about the ancient world. And the nice thing is you're coming in with a PhD in Assyriology. Is that what the field is?
Yeah. So it's basically, it sounds really fancy. It's not. It's studying. We learn ancient Mesopotamia, so the languages and cultures of ancient Mesopotamia. So Assyriologists generally will all learn Sumerian and Akkadian languages, but usually, I don't know about usually, but often they'll focus on one language or the other. I ended up focusing on some of the older stuff. So Sumerian was my dissertation was in Sumerian. So, but yeah, it's neat. I think the neat thing about working in Assyriology is that, when you work in the New Testament or you work in the Old Testament, it can be frustrating at times because you're looking at, as you've talked about so often, you're looking at the copies, right? You don't get to hold the letter that Paul wrote, because those originals are gone, those autographs are gone, and so you have to kind of think, all right, so we've got these 9 copies of First Thessalonians chapter 2, and there are these little variants, and so which one do we think is the original one or whatever? And you have to try to do textual criticism to get back. And what's neat about working in Assyriology is that depending on what genre you work in, you're working with the originals. So when you work with like legal texts and you're working with court cases, you're looking at the court case or the copy that the scribe made of the court case that day for the temple or for wherever. So it's you can see thumbprints in the clay. It's neat to be able to work with original documents like that.
So is that, let me ask you that, on the going back to the clay. So what is that, like a cuneiform tablet? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So essentially, it wasn't the only medium that they used. It wasn't like the only type of material that they used to write on, but they used it a lot because it was easy to make. It was in abundance. And what they would do is they'd take a stylus, like a reed stylus, and they kind of shave it down so there's a point to it. And they take some clay and they kind of, form it together. And sometimes the tablets would be bigger. Sometimes they'd be long and skinny. Sometimes they'd be really tiny. And they would take and hold it in the palm of their hand, and they would impress wedges into it. So cuneiform is wedge-shaped writing, and that's how they wrote the the different signs out. And so it's kind of a complex. They're kind of complex languages, Akkadian and Sumerian, but those tablets tend to preserve pretty well, particularly if they get buried or if the building burns down around them. It cooks, it bakes the clay, and so it tends to preserve better. So you dig down and in a city out in Syria, or dig down a city out in Iraq, and you come down on thousands of these clay tablets or these tablet fragments, and they're just the ones that those people wrote, and it's pretty cool to work with it.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I always thought it'd be pretty interesting to be an archaeologist and to go over to these other parts of the world and just start digging and seeing what I could find, because you do want to learn about what people did back then. Like, do you have any idea what an average day would be like for the basic pauper who's living, say, 3,000 years ago? in
I
that
mean,
area?
it's tough. It's interesting because I excavated in Syria in the city of Mara, which is about an hour east of Aleppo. Before this was in 2000, I guess 2010, so right before the civil war, and it was neat and sad, I guess, all at the same time because you're excavating down, and right next to the big mound, the tell where you're doing the excavation where the city was. There's a village, sort of adjacent to it, right up against it, and a lot of the workers from the village would come and they'd work there at the site as diggers, and they all spoke Syrian Arabic. Nobody spoke any English. So my Arabic was more modern standard Arabic. So, it's a local dialect that I was having trouble, interacting with them. But they would work and they'd work a team of 5 or 6. They'd work, 5 hours a day and they'd get $20 a week for
Oh,
all of them.
wow.
And,
Oh my
and,
gosh, really? Oh,
yeah, it was tough. But, yeah, so, it's tough to know specifics. And of course it's going to vary from period to period, but you had the more elite groups, and these elite groups, would be more well off. But then you'd have sort of the poor, and they were always going to be the poor among the people. And so you had people that were eking out agrarian existences. You had people living in the cities, and the people in the cities would, you know, um, do more specialized things, working with leather or working with metals, those sorts of things. But then you had the people in the hinterland outside of the city, and they were doing the farming and the animal husbandry. So
hmm.
um, they talk about, sorry, I will ramble on,
No, I like
SJ,
this.
so
It's
stop me.
interesting. No, I'm visualizing it as you're saying it because I'm visualizing also Monty Python when he silly Monty Python thing where they're going through a town with a cart and they're like, bring out your dead.
There's some lovely filth over here.
Yes. I'm picturing that as you're telling me this. And I don't know why that hit my mind, but
No, but that sort of idea of like serfdom, and you have like the king, and he's got all his land, and he puts the serfs, and not that I have any expertise whatsoever in, that period. But um, one of the things that I remember from, it was an archaeology class that I took at Hopkins, and one of the things that we were looking at is um, GIS, the satellite images that they take, and they'll look at a site, and you could see direct paths from the city that would go out to the fields, or from where the people lived out to the fields. And they would do calculations based on, when today we have, lots of calories that we take in every day, and we're trying to do exercise. Obviously the opposite's true then. They're trying to have enough caloric intake to sustain themselves, most of the people, so that, they know that they're going to take the most direct path to where they need to go so they don't burn more calories. I mean, it's, the existence was difficult for a lot of the people.
yeah. Well, that's like I've heard this from Jordan Peterson and from other people. I think Jonathan Haidt says this kind of thing, but they talk about before 1800, people pretty much, most people, except for the few rich people, pretty much subsisted on the equivalent of less than $1 a day. And
Yeah.
so you just think about that and you realize in the last couple of 100 years, things have really changed for the better. I mean,
Yes, no doubt.
so it's unbelievable going back to the ancient times and that. And I was just thinking about, I also was listening to Jordan Peterson talking about North Korea, and I know this is complete sidebar, but he says at night when they do those Google images that it's completely dark in North Korea, whereas at night and next door at South Korea, it's all lit up. So it's kind of sad. And but that's also, I was thinking that's how it was back then. We're so spoiled by electricity and air conditioning and all these nice things that you can't even imagine living back then.
Yeah, when you think about, I took a Palestinian archaeology course, and you don't obviously get like full houses preserved, the roof and everything. You just get a foundation, and normally it's not a very high foundation that you get that remains. And so you don't think, I didn't, and most people in the class didn't think about things like how'd they get light, in the house. How did they have ventilation in the house? So you have to factor those types of things in. And um, if you had a courtyard, where did the animals sleep at night? Did they come into the house? And it was, um, it's interesting to think about from an archaeological perspective, trying to reconstruct what daily life was like. So
Yeah. And what do you know what their houses were made out of? I know you said you can only see a foundation, so I guess we wouldn't know if it had wood because that wouldn't
yeah,
be.
they probably did. I mean, we have some fairly good evidence that it's mud brick structure. So they would take mud brick and build up the house. And actually, mud brick is in that part of the world is actually pretty good for regulating temperatures. I mean, compared to something like concrete. When we were out in Syria, we had a compound that was built out of concrete, and we slept up on the roof under mosquito netting, which was
Hmm.
a very interesting experience. But
That's interesting.
it was
Yeah.
funny because sorry, this is far afield too, but you had this little mat, or mattress, little, probably wasn't even a single. I don't even know what it was. But then they built these metal frames around you, and they'd hang the mosquito netting around it, and you'd have to tuck it under your mattress. And the first night I went to sleep, and I woke up, and my knuckles and my knees and my elbows were just torn to shreds with mosquito bites,
Oh,
because they would lay up against the mosquito netting, and they could poke through the mosquito netting. So I had to spray DEET on my
wow.
hands. It was a crazy experience.
It's a lot of
But
mosquitoes.
it was interesting. But they built a singular mud brick room or house, like room, just a single room. And the rationale behind that was it would stay much cooler, even though it was 100 and some degrees outside. It would stay cooler in there because the temperatures would go down during the night, and then they'd stay down because the mud brick would allow that cooler air to. I mean, it wouldn't stay really cooler, and it'd be like 85 or something, but it was much cooler than the concrete building. So
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I haven't been to that part of the world, and I don't foresee myself going there. If I do go somewhere, it'd probably be Israel. But
mm,
um, if I did go over there, I had two offers to go to Dubai, but
mm.
I rejected them. I was like, they wanted for I work for this. I'm on the board actually of an experiential education society, and they wanted me to go over there and teach a couple of these experiential education academy courses,
Oh
and they were going to
wow.
pay me pretty well. But I don't really like. I mean, I'm so nervous about going into different parts of the world. Actually, I hate to say that, but I'll go to
I am
Europe.
too.
There's some places, but right now, especially right now, what's going on over just in different parts of the world, it's
Mm.
you're nervous about that too.
I'm
Syria, I
nervous
wouldn't want to
about
go to Syria now.
yeah, well, yeah, definitely not now. I'm nervous about traveling uh, in any case. So it took a fair amount uh, to get me to get enough gumption to go over. And I remember being over there and taking one of the, because I wasn't an archaeologist. I was the only Assyriologist over there. All the other people were like these experienced archaeologists. I'm the only doofus out there with no experience. And I remember taking one of the other archaeologists by the lapels and saying, "Don't ever let me come back here," because I was so bad at it. I mean, I got better as time went by, but not much better.
No, that's
uh,
funny. That's I mean, it's definitely probably an interesting, as far as archaeology, that's really where you want to be. That's where all the good
yeah,
stuff is. So
yeah.
that's, where do you think, I was just wondering, I've seen these different documentaries on where Mount Sinai is. Do you have any theories on that? Or you've thought about that at all?
No, I haven't. Sorry, let me turn this. How do I turn this sound off?
Because I think
Um,
one time I think I heard somebody was, I mean, I've heard proposals that it's in Saudi Arabia from some people, and then
hmm.
I just don't know. I've of course never been over there, so that's another factor.
Yeah, I haven't really looked into it. I mean, I in the South somewhere, but I wouldn't be able to say more than that. I wouldn't even be able to say that. I wouldn't think. So,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of secondary literature on it, but
So I have to say, last night, now I'm going to tell Jesse Camping. I know he's in the group here, and Jesse's got a list of questions that I haven't read yet, but he emailed them to me. And so I
cool.
have some questions for in a little while, but I wanted to ask you more about last night too, because last night I saw you on Shannon Q's channel
Hmm.
with Laura Robinson, and that
Hmm.
was actually a pretty interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that conversation, and you guys were talking a lot about Well, you're talking about slavery in the Bible and the New Testament versus the Old Testament,
Mhm.
and then how should we look at the Bible? And it's interesting because Laura's views usually when she says something, it's completely against something I would think. It's like, but last night, for some reason, I found myself agreeing with her on a lot of things, actually. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so then I realized maybe I jumped the gun on disagreeing with her early on. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I really do think that I mean, it's so cliche, but I really do think that in so many of these instances, it's sort of like a more moderate approach, or like I see people going to extremes on on these types of topics, and that was sort of the point. I think last night was just trying to get at, look, let's be reasonable about this, right? You know, you don't have to come in and like demonize God, or you don't have to demonize you know, the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament. I don't know how productive that sort of thing is, you know, whatever one's agenda is. Um, and I just think that, you know, trying to understand these texts in their settings, in their context, it's obviously very difficult to do, and it takes a lot of work, but I think it's worthwhile. Um, and I think it can be very beneficial. So yeah, I had fun last night. They made fun of me a bit afterwards, which was neat.
That's funny.
Yeah,
No, last night, because you know, some of the things that she was saying and that you were saying, and you guys were kind of coming to a lot of agreements on some things, but basically, she said one of the gists that I got out of it is a lot of it is historical reporting of events that happened back in the past. And so to me, I think of that as descriptive. And I look at the Old Testament and I think of the Old Testament, except for Psalms and Proverbs, as being really descriptive rather than prescriptive. But then I go to Proverbs and I say, well, there's our prescriptions. That's
Mhm.
that's my view of Proverbs. And then I go to the New Testament. I think that's more prescriptive for Christians. And I think Shannon was kind of getting at this idea that Christians are ready just to throw out the whole Old Testament and say it's a new covenant, you know, stop talking about slavery in the Old Testament and that kind of thing. But I think you guys made a lot of good points about, you know, this is the economic foundation of how people were living and existing back then. And so the point of the whole thing wasn't to try to get rid of slavery, even though a lot of people these days would say it's really awful and they pull out Paul Copan's book and that kind of thing. So, so what's your take looking back at that from last night?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, you know, however much we want to try to get away from it, these are emotional issues, or they're not emotional only, but I mean, they have, I think, a very strong emotional component to them. So, I mean, talking about slavery, um, as much as I've done that in, you know, the past year, it's draining to talk about it, because you end up empathizing, you know, in those situations, and it's tough. But I think that because of that, you know, I know that when I initially came out with some of these videos, I got a lot of pushback, obviously from both sides, but I was sort of surprised at the amount of pushback that I got from parts of the atheist community. Um, and it's because I, I don't blame them for that, because I think they have a way that they've understood these texts. Um, but it's like if I say, look, Exodus 21 it's a bad scenario, right? But it's not a manual on how to get away with, you know, beating your slave within an inch of their life. That's not what that is, right? It's something different. It's actually Exodus 21, 20 to 21 is in place. I think most scholars would say it's a form of protection for the slave. Right? That's what it's there for. Now we look at that still and we go, geez, some protection. And yeah, I mean, to our eyes, I think that's true. I think that's a fair thing to say. But I think that going to an extreme to say, oh, well, here's a manual for how to, you know, how to get away with beating a slave, or it's a manual how to dupe your slave into serving you for life. Like, I don't, even though those things might have been the result of, um, you know, that practice, I don't think that we can assign the intent. In fact, we shouldn't assign that intent, I think, to the writers. So Yeah, it's difficult. I was actually really excited to talk to Laura, um, particularly about how the early church wrestled with slavery, and far outside of my field of expertise. I've done some reading on it, but I mean, certainly, it's not my field. But it was neat to kind of get her take on that and to see how some of the third and fourth century um, theologians and councils tried to grapple with this. It was neat. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that is really neat. And I think about just like Christians were able to get rid of the gladiatorial events in the Roman Colosseum and some of the really gory things that they were doing. And Christians did a lot with hospitals back then and that kind of thing, and helping the poor, not just helping the rich and helping only males and that sort of thing. So Christians did a lot of things. I would imagine they were involved in trying to eliminate slavery, but it could have been probably pretty difficult because it was part of their economic system so much. So that's a challenge. But what she said that I really liked, that she kind of drew attention to it that I hadn't thought about, is she was talking about in the Old Testament, it's under the government was under God essentially, and it was a theocracy. And then if you go to the New Testament, you've got the Roman Empire basically ruling, and you have the Jewish people and this new sect of Christianity sort of being this little obscure group that had no power. And so it's trying to dump slavery in that kind of a situation would make it really difficult. So a lot of the slavery that's described, as she said, was the way that the Romans were treating slaves back then. And I think that put a good perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that distinction of sort of the bottom up, top down difference between the two, the way that the Hebrew Bible is presented and the way that the New Testament is presented, I think is actually really important. And, we talked about this very briefly last night, but I think it's a really important thing to remember, this idea of the return of Christ is coming soon, and to read Paul and to understand Paul's anticipating, we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds. Like he's anticipating that coming is, and Peter, in Second Peter, the writer says, don't think that God is slack, because the idea was that it was coming, and it was coming soon. And I mean, I think that you can see that, when the apostles asked Jesus in Acts chapter 1, will you restore the kingdom now to Israel? Jesus' response isn't no, and his response isn't yes. It's not for you to know the times of the seasons. And I again, certainly not my field, but I think that there's something to that, because I think that there's this aspect of if the writer anticipates that Jesus knows that or is ascribing that to him, I think that there's definitely something to say. He doesn't say a yes or a no. It's almost like a don't worry about it. You go, carry out the Great Commission. You do this in a way as if it's going to happen soon. And I think that's what we see. So knowing that, sorry, that was a long way to say what I'm getting ready to say. Knowing that, I gave the example last night of, I used to work on aircraft. I was in the Air Force for 10 years, and I used to work on the radios, and there was a bunch of different radios up in the flight station. And it would be unbelievably silly if we were up in the flight station and we lost both of the engines and the plane's plummeting toward the ground, to go, man, this VHF radio doesn't work. We have to fix this thing, right? We would say, why are you worried about? We're going to crash. This thing's going to be over soon. And I think that, so let's work to get everybody out of the plane. And I think that's probably a good analogy to this, that the New Testament, the early Christians were, this is going to happen soon. So, Paul's saying, how do you survive in this time in a way that's the most beneficial for you? Is it, all right, we need to stop, slavery, or we need to get everybody free, or whatever? No, I think the response is, look, if you can get free, get free. But this is true of marriage. This is true of any of these types of relationships that you see. Paul's, I prefer no one to get married, but if you have to, go ahead. But it's not because there's something good or bad about the marriage. It's because there's more important things to do in the short time that we have. Sorry, that was
Yeah.
very long-winded.
No, I think that you're right, though. I'll definitely admit that I see that in the Gospels too. It appears in the Gospels and Paul's writings that they definitely thought that something's going to happen in their time. And so, so that's a good point. And imagine, what's interesting is in the last couple of thousand years, people always seem to think that something's going to happen in their time. Like right now, there are people out there thinking that this is the end times. We're in the end times right now, and this is the signs are out there, and the Mahdi's coming, and all that kind of. And that's the Mahdi's out of the Islam book, but a lot of them are thinking that right now. And it could be another 1,000 years or 10,000 years. Nobody really knows when the very end is going to come, when the Earth is going to. We're going to kill each other basically with nuclear bombs. So.
Have you seen this group? I shouldn't laugh, but I don't know what else to do. There's a group called the Congregation of Lord Rael. Have you heard about that or seen that?
Somebody, I saw that written somewhere, and I had no idea what they're talking about. What is that?
So, yeah, I didn't know either. The reason that I came across it, it's a mix of Christian theology, sort of, and Mesopotamian theology. So in short, there's a guy down in, I think they're in Baja, Mexico, and he is the reincarnated. How did it work? He was Enlil, the god, the Sumerian god Enlil, Mesopotamian god Enlil. Then he was, I can't remember the order. He was Moses, and then he was Jesus. Then I think he was King Arthur.
What is it?
Shouldn't laugh. And now he's this guy, Lord Rael. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like Ancient Aliens meets Christianity, but in this weird way. So they do a lot with what is it, gematria, where you count letters in the Hebrew Bible and you find messages. But anyway, they're every day that the gods, this guy is Jesus, right? Reincarnated. He's on earth and he's offering forgiveness to you, SJ. You can be saved by Lord Rael.
Where do I express the money?
Exactly. But it's so funny because I ended up debating. Well, they've been saying for like 2 years now, at least, like it's coming any day. The spaceships are going to fire, from the
wow.
outer solar system or something. But like, yeah, it's funny. I ended up debating one of their like public spokespeople on non sequitur a year and a half ago or something. And I felt bad. Yeah,
that's crazy.
It's probably still up. I think it's actually on. I think we mirrored it on our channel.
What you worry about is when a group like that, they're so nutty that just like that group in Waco, Texas, and the group that went down to Guyana and drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I mean, these people, there's a lot of whack jobs out there.
Yeah, and the thing is, like you feel so bad because these people, like, they're duped. I mean, they really, really are. And there's no reasoning. Well, like, they're on Facebook all the time. And I remember trying to have conversations with some of them, like, okay, like, can you just look at the guy? Like, there he is. Like, that's the reincarnated Christ. I don't understand. Like, anyway.
He's supposed to come in glory, not whatever it is.
But
what is?
Yeah, sorry.
No, that reminds me of something. I want to say I saw a video of you a long time ago where you made your how you came to atheism video.
Mm-hmm.
I think you did something like that, but I'm wondering because I saw that you were a pretty active Christian and you were like an evangelical Christian and you were trying to convert people and do all that kind of stuff. So how did that, then you went to graduate school and you studied and you decided that God's not true, or I'm sorry. Yeah. You decided Christianity is not true anymore. And so you decided to go to atheism. I'm just wondering how did that play out? Seems like to me, there might've been other factors, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. It's, I've actually thought about this quite a bit over the past 2 years, which I think is probably when I made that video. Because I got a lot of pushback from it. Because I said it happened kind of, I think I said within a couple of hours. and that was sort of a little hyperbolic. But to kind of give, and please, if I go on too long about this history, just say, Josh, that's enough. We're done.
No, no, no.
Um,
No, I do find it interesting because I also thought I heard you say something about, or maybe somebody said you said something about having feelings of spirituality prior to this event, and then you didn't have these feelings of spirituality after the event, or something like that.
yeah. So I grew up in a conservative evangelical Christian household. My grandparents were sort of the main influence on my spiritual life. I got saved when I was 5 or 6. Um, and sure.
Sorry, to
No, it's
school.
fine. If you need to get it,
No, no, no. They call every day and tell us to go. They call, they email, they do everything, and so we'll get a hold of
I
them.
gotcha. Yeah, we get that too. But you know, my grandfather was adamant. He was an ordained Baptist minister, and he was adamant that everybody was gonna be have their salvation secure. And it was really who I was. So I was again, I was saved 5, 6 years old. We studied the Bible all the time. I remember like doing stuff like saying the books of the Bible as fast as I could forwards, and then I learned to memorize them, saying them fast as I could backwards. We always went to Awana, those sorts of things. But I mean, that was that was the core of who I was. So I was Jesus boy in school. I always tried to lead people to the Lord when I was, particularly in middle school, starting in middle school, and then definitely in high school. Joined the Air Force when I was 17, and immediately started a Bible study. And ministering the gospel to people was what I did. And so I got accepted to Liberty University, and got my bachelor's degree there while I was still on active duty. And then I always wanted to be a chaplain in the Air Force, so I got commissioned as a second lieutenant and started seminary. So I went to Capital Bible Seminary, which is a conservative evangelical seminary. It was before it got bought out by Lancaster Bible College. But I went there, got a master's of theology, started pastoring a church out in Virginia. So I was the associate pastor of a church out there for 7 years. And, we were like, it's hard to explain to somebody. Obviously you understand it, but I mean, somebody that isn't a Christian wouldn't understand the difference between, like, I don't know, not playing Christianity, but if I was driving somewhere and a parking spot opened up, I'd say, Lord, thank you so much for letting that parking spot open up. I mean, it was that much of a part of my life. And I remember I taught Hebrew for 2 years at seminary in my last 2 years while I was writing my thesis. And the dean of the school of the seminary said to me, and when I got accepted to Hopkins, he said, "Are you ready for this? Because Hopkins is a pretty liberal school." And I held up my Bible and I said, "I'm going into the lion's den, but I'm going to win souls for Christ." Like that was my attitude going in. And that first semester at Hopkins, one of the things that I'm very linguistically minded, in the sense that I really like learning the languages. And so learning, the historical or archaeological aspects, it was there, but I didn't really throw myself into it. Like I was studying Hebrew and Aramaic and Akkadian and Syriac and Ugaritic and all these other languages. So, diving into all of these difficulties wasn't really what I was all about. Historical problems or archaeological problems, any of that stuff. And that first semester in particular, but really the first year at Hopkins, was very difficult because there were two things that happened. One, I was learning Akkadian and Sumerian and reading all of that ancient literature in its original form, and noticing the intertextuality that exists between the Hebrew Bible and like the story of Atrahasis or Gilgamesh or any of these other stories. and at the same time, I was learning, having to engage with all the archaeological and historical problems that somebody that works in the Hebrew Bible has to face. And it because I was a fundamentalist Christian, everything hung upon the inerrancy and complete historical reliability of the Bible as a whole, and particularly the Hebrew Bible. And when things started to kind of, holes started to get punched in it, like there's this historical problem, there's that historical problem. It was like the whole web unraveled for me. And it was like, well, this is something that happens to a lot of people, but it's like, well, if this part's not true and I believe in inerrancy and inspiration, well, then all of it must be no good. There must be no value to any of it. And so, that first year I was like, well, I became an atheist, like a really hardcore atheist. And there was a friend of mine that went to seminary with me that stayed in really close contact with me while I was at Hopkins. He came up and took me out to dinner every Thursday to kind of get me out of Baltimore City. And sorry, Oliver's sneaking in. But he'd come up and he was with me through this whole transition, and he'd kind of every week he'd kind of pull me back a little bit from the hardcore atheism. Okay, maybe that's not what you need. Okay, let's come back a little bit more, Josh. And I really do think he was responsible for sort of settling me into a more of an agnostic position. It's like, yeah, okay, there are these problems, and maybe there's a God. I don't know that I can rule that out. But yeah, I mean, and then I promise I will stop talking. Sorry, I just realized how much I've been talking.
No, I have heard a little bit of that before. I think it's an interesting story. Do you think, see, for me, I just going to say something really quickly. I came back to Christianity. I actually I was raised a Catholic, and I left the church for 20 years. And then I came back, and then I sort of started having these spiritual experiences about 2012. And that's what brought me back. I didn't even have a full Bible in my house. I had this little New Testament that had the Psalms and Proverbs, and that was it. It's like the size of a wallet. And so, but I don't think to me, it's not, the Bible is just a book that people wrote. I mean, it's a book that I believe is God inspired, and I actually do believe it's inerrant, but I think it's the spiritual experiences that can bring you back if you so desire.
Yeah. I mean, see, that was, for me, that was probably the scariest part of all of this, because I had a conversation with an evangelical friend of mine who went to Hopkins with me. I talk about him a lot. I try not to say his name, though I slip up sometimes. But, I remember calling him actually, like even like a year ago, and just having a conversation with him, saying like, and we had these conversations while we were at Hopkins. And I would say, how do you know? Like, why is it that you believe? Because see, like he understood, and he's a very intelligent guy. He knows a lot more than I do about Assyriology. He wouldn't say that's true, but I would say it's true. But we would have these conversations like, okay, so you see the problem with the Philistines. Yeah, sure. Or you see the problem with, like something like Ezekiel 26. Yeah, sure. Why doesn't that bother you? And his response is always, look, my faith is not, I have a different hermeneutical approach than you did coming up as a fundamentalist, evangelical. He said, those things don't bother me. I said, well, how do you know that it's true? Like, why is it that you believe that? And he said, well, I've had a personal experience with Jesus Christ. And he said, I realize that that's subjective and that's not something I can demonstrate to you. But he said, I know that God is real. And I know that Jesus Christ has paid the penalty for my sins as much as I know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. And he said, I just know that. And the thing is, I could identify with that because that's exactly what I felt like. What was the scariest part of the transition into agnosticism for me was that I missed praying, right? Because there was, and I would pray. I would pray probably for 3 years after I moved into agnosticism. I would periodically pray driving in the car, and that feeling of connection, that spiritual connection that I had was still there. And then one day it wasn't. And that was very frightening to me. Um, because, despite what maybe people think on the internet about me, I don't know. I would love for Christianity to be true. I would love for the faith of my youth to be true. I really would. Um, it's 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 just I don't think that it is. Um, and the fact that praying those over those several occasions and that feeling being gone, that feeling of spiritual connection being gone, was a scary thing for me, because it was me genuinely praying, and it made me conclude that that's learned behavior. That's a feeling that can be developed. I don't know that to be true, but that's the conclusion that I've come to. So
That's interesting. And
yeah.
I have a question here that Stephen Rivard had, and I pinned it up here in the thing. I don't know if you can see the chat.
Oh no, I've just got the Zoom window up. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. So it says, when you in Schuyler fiction do all your mocking of Christians, how do you avoid determinism if every teeny particle in the universe is just molecules in motion obeying the laws of nature? So I guess he's asking, are you a determinist, where you think that everything's been biologically predetermined?
I mean, I haven't looked into that aspect of biology or astrophysics or even philosophy to be able to answer that question. So I don't know. I don't know. I would say, like, I get the question, the first part of the question. Um, and Skylar and I have a lot of conversations off air, and I think one of the things that I'm sure he'll be okay with me saying this. Um, I told him when we first started doing the Raptor Jesus thing. I was like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's like Monty Python to me, right? Like the quest for the Holy Grail or something. I said, but there's still just something that doesn't feel right about it, and you kind of get used to it after a while. But he laughed and he said, "Look, man, you got to remember, this is an entertainment channel." And that's just the reality. I think people have to understand is that Skylar's there. Skylar's an agnostic.
Schuyler
And
does more mocking than you, though, I have to say.
he does. He
I mean, he
does.
dressed me up in this ridiculous yellow outfit, and then he dressed me up in like a McDonald's outfit. What the hell?
It was
Like,
so
look at his channel. I'm like, what is he doing?
like, I mean, so I don't want to be like, I don't want to I don't feel like I'm breaking any confidence with it, but I say stuff like this. But I was there off air when that whole thing went down, and I remember him texting me and going, "Why would she think that I'm making fun of her by putting her in that outfit?" And I said, "Yeah, it might be because she hasn't seen Clueless, like the movie Clueless." And so then it was like, well, again, I
No,
get
I
it.
haven't actually seen that movie.
Yeah. I mean, like that outfit, that outfit is like I think they're in Beverly Hills maybe, but it's like some they're really, really rich.
Well, that I didn't like that outfit, but I don't see it just like she's like looks to me like Big Bird, like this orange, this yellow color.
Yeah, I mean,
But
that definitely, I mean, I can tell you that's not what he was going for. But I think like bigger picture, you know, who Praise I Am That I Am is.
yeah, he's usually over here.
Praise and I are friends. We email. It's funny. I think so much of the animosity that is seen between us is, I don't want to say it's for show, but I think there's probably a lot of it that's for show, because off air, behind the scenes, we're very friendly with each other. But like, he dresses me up in weird stuff. He calls me Digital Fartarabi all the time, or Digital Quackarabi. I mean, like, I don't know. When I look at this stuff, I think, and I've told him this, like, don't hold that off air. I've said, look, man, we're good. You do what you got to do to get views on your channel. If that's, because I'm cool. I'm good with it. Like, I know it's all in fun. So yeah, it's jarring, I guess. The first time that I saw, he had a cartoon of me like bent over with gas coming out of my backside. I mean, it was like really,
Oh, geez.
but it was like, okay. I mean, it's okay. It's fine.
Yeah, that's well, see, the only problem is with some of that kind of stuff is I have students and they sometimes go to the internet and I have
Yeah.
kids and kids go to the internet.
Yeah.
And that's the thing when there's a lot of back and forth taunting. And if they don't see the other videos and they just happen to catch that one, I mean, I've got it's bad enough because I called Atheist Experience in 2017 and I acted like a pompous fool and it's captured and 500,000 people have seen it already. And
Oh
so,
gosh.
so I'm trying to tone it down a little bit, but of course I'm on here because I want to spread, in my view, I want to share the news. And so,
Yeah.
it's kind of like a double-edged sword. I want to do it on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'm trying to maintain a semblance of decent reputation somewhat, so.
Yeah. I feel it in a different way. Like I don't know if everybody knows this, but I hate debating. I hate it. I despise it. I have terrible anxiety. And even if I know that I'm right, I hate doing it. I don't like confrontation with people.
Yeah.
And it's so like that's one of the reasons that I just won't, if I can at all help it, do a debate without Skylar there, because Skylar loves doing them, right? He loves confrontation, and I can just mute and I can sit back and he could argue with people. And then whenever there's something useful that I can say, I can unmute and go, all right, here's what I think. All right, mute. You're like, there's no pressure on me because I could be in the background. And I hate it. So, but the problem is that when you come out with like a Daniel video, right? When I come out with an Ezekiel 26 video, like those are, I mean, what do I expect, right? People are going to push back and people are going to argue with me about it. And it's been a tough thing to realize that, okay, I can't just, there's only so much that I could just ignore people that are commenting, and I do have to, if I'm going to do what I say I'm trying to do here and engage with people, I have to do it. So I feel you. I feel the double-edged sword of doing this. So
yeah, it's tough. And I can say Skylar does, I mean, he gets in a ton of debates and he's debating and he's got the same strategy, but he actually, I want to say, I saw the debate with you and Skylar and Craig's in the chat here, Craig Reed, and Dry Apologist, I think, is also in the chat here. So, the only one who's not in the chat in that little party is Skylar. So that was interesting. So should I look at these questions here from Jesse Camping?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Okay, let me just take a look. I don't want to. Jesse sent these a while ago. So let's see. He writes, I'm extremely excited to see Dr. Bowen on your channel, and I have a few questions I would really like you to consider, and they are on topic rather than religious ones. Okay, so let's see what he says. All right, here we go. Hold on one second. It's easy to see the Hammurabi Codex is written heavily on the upper class, and with the cities themselves being a larger focus of the empire, as Dr. Karen Radner writes on the Neo-Assyrian period, do you think the code was put on a stone to inspire or encourage city growth and attract the upper or select class move inside the gates of the cities, good for trade and business and influence of the area?
So just in case anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, was that about the code?
It sounds like it's about the code and about written for the upper class. Do you think it was something to try to?
My MS, I forget the first parts of things often. So I thought it was about the Code of Hammurabi, but I blanked on it. So yeah, what we're talking about is if you go to the Louvre Museum now in Paris, and you'll see this, it's like a 7-foot diorite black monument. And it's, I don't know, it's like 20 centimeters or something in diameter. And it's a beautiful piece. And it's got a large portion of the top is taken up with a picture of two figures, a seated deity, the god Shamash, who is the sun god. He's the god of justice and other things. And he's seated with these emblems in his hand, which are kind of debated what they are. But they represent justice or law or some aspect of it. And he's seated before the king at the time of the Babylonian Empire, which was Hammurabi. So King Hammurabi. So we're talking 18th century BCE, middle of the 18th century, and this big stele has, between 275. It had between 275 and 300 laws on it initially. I say initially because it was in the 12th century. It was captured by an Elamite king, and over in Iran, and it was taken over as war plunder, probably from where it was sitting it was either in Babylon or in Sippar, but it was sitting probably in the temple courtyard, and it was taken because that's one of the things that they do is they take gods, they take precious things that they consider to be incredibly valuable and meaningful, and they take it back, and so it was excavated there beginning of the 20th century. And the Elamite king, had his scribes had, or whoever was doing it, had chiseled off a section, and he was going to have his own inscription put on there, but he never got to do it for whatever reason. So there's a section missing. So I think we have 282 preserved, maybe, laws. I don't know why I went into all that detail, but we talk about the Code of Hammurabi a fair amount. So
what's an example? I guess you're still finishing the question, but also maybe an example of some of the laws that we can relate to. Were they kind of related to our laws? Were they similar to our laws, or what were they?
No, they're well, I mean, I guess maybe in theory. So they're always formed. If you've read parts of like Exodus 21, for example, is a really good parallel to this. They're written in a casuistic form, so they're case law, and they're written with a protasis and an apodosis, right? There's an if and then a then. So if X happens, then Y happens. So your protasis, if this happens, then your apodosis, X, that happens. And there's a lot that we could talk about with that, but that's the structure of it. So if an ox who is known to gore people is not penned up, by his owner, I'm paraphrasing, and it gores an awilu, a free man, then this is the penalty. Or if, I guess a simpler one, if a man kills a man in such and such a way, then he will be killed, or this will be the penalty, or whatever. So you have all these laws, but they're bracketed by a prologue and an epilogue. And this is sort of getting, I guess, to the question. So the prologue is describing Hammurabi as being the stereotypical Mesopotamian king, right? Mesopotamian kings, as early as the third millennium, we know they're all about being good shepherds of their people. They're caring for the weak. They're caring for the oppressed. They're taking care of the little guy, right? There's a king in the third millennium in the early dynastic period named Urukagina or Ur-Enumgina. And he talks about how he righted all of these wrongs, that these people were oppressing other people, and he came in and set it all straight. This is the stereotypical thing that kings want to do because they are divinely appointed, right? The kingship comes from heaven, and the king is appointed divinely, and his job is to care for his people. Sounds
like Trump.
Yeah, I mean, this is the propaganda, right? I mean, like, is that necessarily how it happens? Well, I mean, to be fair, like to a fair amount, to a fair extent, or we have a lot of good evidence that he did that. But I mean, he's not this altruistic ruler. He's, there's stuff behind these inscriptions.
Just like Trump. Amazing. That would be a good parallel. Didn't you guys do a parallel like that?
We did. Yeah. Over on, whose channel was it on?
Was it Shannon's channel? I think.
I don't remember. It might have been. I
knew I heard something like that. I knew I wasn't being original.
It was guess who said this. There's something like that. And they read a royal inscription, and it said, like, I am this thing right here, this prism looking thing, right? Can I see right there? It's a royal inscription of a king in the late third millennium called Shulgi. And Shulgi, he I am the greatest ever. No one is better than me. I've got a great brain. No, I'm just kidding. He doesn't say that. But anyway, this is what they did, right? This is this. So, okay. So the Stele of Hammurabi is, it wasn't the only one that we had, or that existed. There were probably there were several, and we know there were several of them. It's the best preserved, and they were set up in temple courtyards. We have texts that say this, text was copied from the Stele in the temple courtyard. So, getting at what that was supposed to do is actually a very thorny problem. Not the least of which is, are these laws in the sense that we think about them? Like, are these legislation? Is it, Hammurabi has this thing written down. If X happens, then Y is to happen. Okay, now that's promulgated, and now that's the law of the land because he wrote it down. Like normative legislation, which was sort of the traditional view for a long time. Or are these more descriptive of what was going on? Are these cases that Hammurabi sat in on, some of them, and maybe some of them that expanded on? So it's difficult even to get at that in scholars debate. That sort of stuff still quite a bit.
Yeah, it's now it's my actually, let me ask Stupid Horror Energy, Sarah, she has a super chat. So thank you, Sarah. She wanted to know if you could compare, and also Jesse Camping just did a super chat saying, thank you for having you. That's really nice. And Sentinel Apologist also said he was happy to see you on here. So thank you, cool. Rob. But I wanted to ask you the question that Sarah asked, is she said, how similar is the Code of Hammurabi to the 10 Commandments?
The 10 Commandments are different. They're in a different style. So, we've been talking about these if-then clauses. Of course, the 10 Commandments aren't in that style. They're called apodictic laws. They're you will do X or you will not do X, so prescriptive or proscriptive. So the comparison that most scholars will make, and there's a guy that wrote, I think his name's Christopher Wright. I always get him mixed up. Wright is his last name, Wright. But he wrote a book, and what he's arguing is that Exodus, the covenant code, Exodus 21 in particular, and probably into 22, was essentially a direct parallel to the Code of Hammurabi, to the extent that he argues that, like, it's not just a motif, a similar motif or a similar legal tradition, that it's that the writer of Exodus 21 is thinking about the Code of Hammurabi when he writes these laws. Now, there's a lot of critique that's been made of that position, but the reason that he can make that kind of an argument is because there is so much similarity there. But of course there are distinctions as well. So I guess there's a very famous legal scholar who's now deceased, and he taught actually right when I came to Hopkins is when he passed away. But his name was Raymond Westbrook, and he was an Assyriologist that also did Hebrew Bible stuff. And his ideas, one of the more popular ideas, not the only popular idea, but one of them, and that is that these laws are all part of a common legal tradition. So there was a legal ontology that existed, that everybody kind of thought relatively the same way. That didn't mean that all the laws shook out the same way, but they all had similar logic. They all had similar, people were facing similar problems, and they faced them in similar ways. So there is that kind of a connection.
Interesting. I want to say I got another question from Jesse. It says, if anywhere can we find cuneiform or court documents that use the Hammurabi Codex literally? If so, can you direct any who are interested? Yeah,
so Bruce Wells, in 2008, I think, he wrote, I can't remember the name of the article. If anybody's interested in it, shoot me an email. I can get it. The short answer is very few, right? We have a couple, and they're not direct statements like the guy went and looked at the still of the still of Hammurabi. Um, we have what are considered illusions, but again, there aren't many. Now the stele itself says, if any man, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but if any man has like a problem, he come and look at my, look at my stela here, and he can find justice in that way. Probably not meant as, like literally everybody. In other words, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. The
No, no.
question, the question that people ask is, from a legislative standpoint, did these laws, were they put on by Hammurabi to enact law in the same way that we would today? Like, okay, now it's on the books and now it's law. So if anybody breaks it after this, they can go back and say, look, right there, it says you can't do this. Most people would say no. There are a couple people that still do. Gregory Kirikinyo seems to still hold to that. I think Falk still has sort of an idea of that. Don't quote me on that, though. I know you're going to, SJ, you're probably going to run out and go, Josh said Falk. No, I'm just kidding.
I definitely don't know even who you're talking about. So,
but more likely the case, I think, is that what these laws are describing what the legal concepts were. It's describing how the laws were carried. It was describing practice. Now, even that is debated, right? Even that is debated because there are people like Jean Bottereau who think that these are just academic treatises. These are just academic exercises that the scribal students were doing, and we know that they were, but are they just that? Is the question. So no, to answer the question in the longest possible way that I could have, I don't think that for the most part, or even for the majority, that is what for the most part means, that judges were going, okay, what is your problem? All right, hang on, let me go check.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what we have to do. I don't think that's how they were used.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something that I think Jesse Camping came up with at one point, but didn't it work that it depended on what your level in society was as far as the punishment in the Code of Hammurabi? Like if you're a king, you're not going to be punished as much as if you're a pauper for the same kind of crime. Is that the case?
It's so a couple of things. One, and I probably should have said this earlier, that the laws of Hammurabi are like they're not the earliest collection of laws like that we have. They're not even, so we have them as early as in a collected form like that. We have them as early as the late third millennium. So there's a king named Ornama, and he's got a collection in Sumerian. And you have the laws of Lipit Ishtar in the early second millennium. You have the laws of Eshnuna, maybe 100 years or so before Hammurabi, and then you have Hammurabi's laws. So it's a tradition that he's taking part of. But to answer your question, so you see this sort of class distinction vividly in the laws of Hammurabi. So you have three different classes, or three different classes. Fine. You have the Awilu, who is, sometimes that word means just a person. It's not respective of a class. But if it's in the context of another one of these classes, then it's referring to probably like a full citizen. So you have the Awilu, who if it's being differentiated, it's like a full citizen. You have the Mushkenu, and the Mushkenu is like a commoner, so someone of lower status. And then you have the Wardu or the Amtu, who are the male and female slave. So you'll see these types of things in the text where it will say, if an Awilu knocks out the eye of an Awilu, then he knocks his eye out. Or if he knocks the tooth out of an Awilu, then he knocks his tooth out. So, your talionic principles. Um, but it'll say, if an awilu knocks out the eye of a mushkenu, so a commoner, then I think that one's 60 shekels of silver, which is nothing to sneeze at, right? It's a mina of silver, but still, it's a lesser
Yeah.
penalty. So and of course, as you get into a slave, the fines go down even further, and you see that very, very clearly. If anybody's interested in reading through these, by the way, Martha Roth has a book called Law Collections it's Law Collections something, and the word Asia is in there. I can't remember the title. It's on my shelf, and I can't remember the name of it. But she has gone through Martha Roth from the Oriental Institute. I mean, she's brilliant legal scholar.
No,
a Syriologist.
That's
Sorry,
great. No, I like that. I think that's really interesting because you think about our society. Imagine how almost confusing it would be if you had to figure out what level you're at as far as what sort of punishment you're having. I have a question. I have a few questions coming in, and it's but there's this one here from Sentinel Apologetics that I think looks pretty good. They're all pretty good. Somebody actually before that asked about if you've read John Walton's take on Genesis. But then this question here, Josh, isn't it true that OT law was to create a kingdom of priests, Exodus 19:6, but the purpose of the code is to show the gods that the king was performing his duty to uphold justice?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your interpretive approach, right? So if you're asking, it sounds like what he's asking is from the way the text is presenting itself. So I guess the first question that one would have to ask is, what is the hermeneutic? So if you're looking at these texts, which I think Rob probably is saying this is a coherent system. So these distinctions that we see between these three legal passages or these three legal sections, let's say in about slavery in Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15 and Leviticus 25, that this in the end is a coherent system, right? If you're looking at it from that perspective, you're going to come up with a different, I think, understanding of what the laws are trying to do. So yes, to start maybe with the laws of Hammurabi, again, as we said, the whole point of a good king is that he's a just ruler that's caring for the weak and the oppressed, and he's ensuring that everything is right in his land, and he's caring for the people as a good shepherd does. And the Stele of Hammurabi, like I think many other royal inscriptions, is designed to do just that, right? Like, look, Shamash, for example, but maybe not even Shamash, but I mean, look, oh gods, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, as one of its propagandistic aspects. So the Hebrew Bible is, I think, formulated, in such a way that it's saying these are God's laws, right? And this is what God wants Israel to do, as absolutely, to be its set apart nation, his set apart nation. So here are the Levitical laws that are really, really focused on holiness and being set apart and being pure. They really are. They're really concerned with the emissions of the body, right? So, and how they make you impure. And that's the rationale behind it. So here's how Israel is going to be this beacon, right? They're going to be set apart. They're going to be superior to the other nations. They're going to be God's chosen people. So yeah, I mean, I think absolutely that's what the laws are doing. But again, that's looking at it from the perspective of the text. There are other ways that one could look at that, that we don't have to get into them here.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So I have friends who are Jewish, and they often tell me, I said, well, why do you think that God said you couldn't eat shellfish and you can't mix, meat with cheese and do that kind of thing? And they said it was because they wanted, just like what you said, God wanted to separate the Israelites from the surrounding peoples who had different eating habits. And so that would mean that they probably wouldn't eat together in dinners and things like that. And so there'd be less likelihood that they'd intermingle and marry. And so I thought that was interesting. And then it's also interesting, just when Jesus came in Acts 10, essentially all of those food laws were thrown out. So
it's such an interesting story. It was one of my favorite stories actually in Acts 10. Where Peter's up on the roof praying, and I think that's the story you're talking about.
Yeah,
and,
that's
and the sheet comes down from heaven, and there's
Yeah.
all these creepy crawly things, and he's like, "Whoa, buddy, whoa, buddy," and God says, "Kill and eat." No, this is a test, isn't it? No, I'm not doing that. It's very interesting, and then Cornelius shows up on the door. Yeah,
you got a good memory. That's exactly it. Hey, what's the takeaway? Has a question here. It says Jordan B. Peterson, I'm sure that's who JBP is, describe Marduk as a being with 1,000 eyes and cosmic awareness. Is that accurate? Do you know Marduk is being with 1,000 eyes, cosmic awareness?
Yeah, I don't know what text he'd get that from. So Marduk is one of the things that we see in Mesopotamian religion, if we can call it that, as we kind of come down through the millennia, is that you go from the gods just being these natural phenomena, like the sun or the storm cloud or the moon or whatever, and they become more and more anthropomorphized, right? And by the time you get into the second millennium, even in the third millennium, you've got all these different city gods. Every city's got their own god, and when the cities fight, the gods are actually fighting. And actually, you see some of that showing up in the Hebrew Bible as well. That sort of idea. It's nuanced, obviously, but as you come down into the first millennium in particular, you get a lot of syncretism. So that there become these essentially two main deities that show up in the first millennium. You have the god Ashur in the north in Assyria, and he's the mountain god up in the north. And then in the south, you have the god Marduk. And it doesn't mean that there weren't other gods, but Marduk takes on a lot of these other gods sort of get syncretized with him. So it's like that's an aspect of him. That's an aspect of him. And so when you read through, if anybody reads through, if anybody's interested in Assyriology, this is also a really good book to get, Before the Muses by Benjamin Foster. It's very thick, but it's Akkadian literature in English translation. And so most of the really famous Mesopotamian stories, like the flood story, Atrahasis, those sorts of things, or the Enuma Elish, the creation story, they're all in there in English with commentary. But anyway, at the end of the Enuma Elish, which is a story about Marduk and his rise to supremacy over the other gods, at the end, there's a whole section where Marduk is given 50 different names to describe various aspects of him, or various, aspects is probably a good way to say it. So, I mean, that's true. Like, there's a lot of syncretism that goes on with Marduk, and but I don't know about specifically the 1,000 eye thing. I don't know if I know where that comes from.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for a super chat. She says, "Have you been to the Louvre to see the code?"
I haven't. No, it would be nice. I wanted to go when I was, I got a Fulbright scholarship, and I went to Germany in 2014, 2015, which was,
that's awesome.
It was horrible and fun, and at the same time, because I'm a homebody.
Where were you in Germany? My brother lives there. He lives in Berlin.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was in further south. I was down in Tübingen, so south of Stuttgart.
Okay.
But there was a scholar down there, Professor Konrad Folk, who was incredibly nice, and he said that he would, work with me if I got a scholarship to go over there. So, but when I was over there, my dissertation was working with tablets that are primarily in the museum in Istanbul, and you can't get to those, or you couldn't get to them then. But there was one really important tablet that I needed to look at, and it was in the Louvre, and I wrote in German. I wrote, it was just the way you're supposed to write. And couldn't get in. They wouldn't let me in. It was very frustrating, but
Oh, that would be frustrating.
yeah, but
So
it worked out.
yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So, so I think I'm going to ask anybody if you want to get in some more questions here, but it's going to be just another couple of minutes before we'll let Josh get to his family and do all the fun things that he's got planned. Did you guys know? I don't know. Josh just told me he has 3 kids and 1 on the way. So he is
Yep.
about to have a very full house.
They keep us busy.
I'll tell you, when I turned, I remember I turned 40 and I told my husband, I said, should we try for another one? And he said, no. He said, we'll for sure get divorced if we have another one. So we're still together. So maybe my sister had 3 and she did get divorced.
Yeah, it could be tough.
Hard.
It could be tough. Yeah,
it's hard. You got to be, but the fact you spaced them out, that might make it, because you now have a built-in babysitter too, in a way.
This is true. It is nice to be able to say, Paige, can you just watch Oliver for a few minutes? I'm just gonna go close my eyes. That's all I'm gonna do is go close my eyes.
Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. So let me just see. I'm looking in the chat here really quickly. I want to say hi to everybody in the chat. Thank you guys so much for coming on here. Steve Rivard. Oh, here's a question. Granting that carbon dating puts the Old Testament was written before Jesus was even born, how does Josh explain all the prophecies? I don't know how the carbon dating has to do with the prophecies.
Yeah,
I'm trying to figure out.
No, it's a fair question. I mean, yeah, there is carbon dating that's been done, like on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So yeah, I mean, but no,
I see what he's saying. Okay, I see what.
So I don't think anybody that I know of would doubt that I mean, obviously the Hebrew Bible, we know the Hebrew Bible was written long before Jesus walked the earth. So the assumption in the question, and I know SJ, this is a position that you hold too, and obviously that's absolutely fine. But it's the assumption that the New Testament texts are the fulfillment of Old Testament texts in that way. I would say that the New Testament text, the New Testament authors are reading back into what was standing in the Hebrew Bible. But interestingly enough, we had I don't know if you saw it, SJ, but we had Dr. Stephen Cook on the channel a week ago, maybe.
I didn't see that.
But he came on. He's a professor of Old Testament languages and literature at Virginia Theological Seminary, and he's Episcopalian or Anglican, 6'1", and he made he makes what I consider to be a good case for passages like Isaiah 7:14 or Isaiah 53. While they have what we would call a near referent, let's say Hezekiah in Isaiah 7:14, or the idealized nation of Israel in Isaiah 53, whatever it is that we consider the near referent, that still allows for and anticipates later fulfillment, more later fulfillments. And I don't agree, but he makes a good case for it. So it's actually a good video. I think for anybody watching, I think you'd enjoy it, SJ.
I would.
He's a super nice guy. Super nice guy.
Yeah. Well, see, I decided that, people probably would like to see me kind of hammer you on some of this stuff, but I'm not going to do that, because I think that's not the reason I brought you onto the channel. I brought you on under the pretext that we were going to have a nice conversation. And now that I know you don't like debating and you don't want to do.
Oh no, I mean, if you've got this, like, I don't mind people asking hard questions.
Yeah, no, I think we've had some pretty good. I mean, the Isaiah 53 to me, I mean, I get your point, and I get what people say, that they say maybe the Old Testament or the New Testament authors were trying to make it up. My counter to that would basically be that they didn't really get any sort of benefit out of making up a lie. Essentially, they got nothing out of it. It was pretty awful for them in the first century.
Yeah.
So that's my.
I mean, I would nuance it probably more than that. I get what I mean by that is, I don't think. I'm trying to think of a good parallel. It's not a good parallel, but it's one that will get closer to my point. I'm hesitant to use it because I don't want to draw comparisons between what I'm getting ready to say. you'll understand what I mean when I say this. People that are following Lord Rael right now, one of the things that when I was debating that public spokesperson or whatever, he said, well, here in this text, it talks about, I will lift them up on eagle's wings in Exodus 19. And down here, Lord Rael was on the border of, Mexico, and, there was this eagle emblem or something, and that's a fulfillment of that. Now, the thing is, I hear that and I go, but the thing is that he's not lying when he says that. Like that's true to him. Like that is a connection. When they were looking at these like these gematria, you see like Lord Rael written in the Hebrew this way, and then like Messiah and forever and king and ruler or whatever all around it. Like that seemed really convincing. And I mean, they looked at that and they said, "Oh my God, this is evidence. It's clear evidence." And so even when I went and bought the software program that the guy was using, and reproduced it with me saying, Joshua is the Messiah, right? And with the same words around it, because I mean, you really can get it to say a lot of different things. It didn't matter to them because because they were convinced of what it is that that they were being told and that they were propagating. So I guess what I would say is, I wouldn't say that any of the New Testament authors were lying. What I would say is they were so entrenched, and it's far more nuanced than even what I'm getting ready to say. But I would say that they were they knew these texts so well, and that they were so convinced of Jesus being the Messiah, that they reconciled it as necessary. Now again, I don't have any problem. I don't have a problem with anybody disagreeing with that, but I mean, that's the way that I look at that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. That would probably be the counter argument that you'd have to make. I want to say there's two more questions that I can do. I've got John Lloyd, and then I've got DS Dean, and John Lloyd did this very generous super chat. He believes in a flat Earth, so he's got a flat Earth question. He says, please check our flat Earth model. Flat Earth on eyes: sclera, ice wall, iris, land and sea, pupil, magnify, center of eye and existence, eyes, sun and moon, nose, North Pole Mountain, center of plane and face. I am completely lost on that question, but
well, I am totally convinced.
He just said enough to get okay. Yeah, so you're convinced. You're not believing in a globe model anymore.
Yeah, I'm set. I am set. That's great.
All right. Yeah. Now that's a tough one, John. You've got to. I mean, just if you get in a plane and you go around the planet, a lot of times you can actually see that it's shaped. I mean, you see it when they go up, and you see the. Here's the one thing, John. I just want to say, if you take a look at this idea that you're thinking, it would mean basically that the whole world was conspiring against this idea that the astronauts have gone to the moon and taken a picture of the Earth. It'd be as if this whole world, including Russia during the Cold War and the United States, were conspiring. And I think that's kind of a big position to take. But let me ask DS Dean. Weren't Apsu and Tiamat the metaphysical foundation of Sumerian metaphysics, two types of eternal waters that mixed? Can he elaborate, since the internet is thin on detail?
Yeah, if you'd like to get a fairly recent book, it's 2013. But Lambert, before he died, he was an eminent Assyriologist. He wrote a book on Babylonian creation myths. It's in the Mesopotamian Civilizations series. If the person emails me, I can get them the bibliographic reference. But so Apsu and Tiamat, in the story that he's referring to, is the Enuma Elish. So this, what everybody refers to as the Babylonian creation myth. In the beginning of the text, it talks about Apsu, which is sort of the underground sweet water. And that was a deity, considered a deity, the earliest deity in the text. And Tiamat is, like the oceans or the seas. and they mixed together, they mingled their waters together, and from that mingling, creation started. They began to create. That sort of watery origin or watery chaos is very common. It's a common motif in the ancient Near East from a creation standpoint, and you see it in Genesis 1, where you have the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. I'm not saying that it's doing the same thing there, but it's the motif. So, I don't. If the question is, did they consider that at like a more philosophical level? No, I don't think so. I think that's probably anachronistic. That might not be what the question was, but there are a couple of problems with early creation stories in Mesopotamia, just like anywhere else, and that is that there's not unification on the different ideas. So you have different creation ideas, and that wasn't a problem for them. That would be a problem for us, but it wasn't for them. You can have an early watery mass, or you can have gods doing a different kind of creation, or heaven and earth coming together. It wasn't a problem for them in the same way that different deities had different family members. Different gods were the children of one god in one text and of a different god in another text. And how does that happen? It wasn't a problem for them.
That's interesting. They didn't get that dissonance. All right, one last question, guys, because then I'm going to have to let Josh go. But Sentinel Apologetics, my bud Rob, he said, what's Josh's opinion about J.D. Watt's word biblical commentary on Isaiah 53? If he has read it, he thinks Zerubbabel fits all the details, but as a shadow of Jesus in the New Testament. Have you read that?
Yeah. So Zerubbabel is one of the, the possible early figures. Sorry, I heard Oliver cry out. He's just giggling, I think. So the question that, always comes up, and that I don't know that we can ever get to a good answer on, is who is the near referent? What is the near referent in Isaiah 53? Who was that servant? Now it's clear in earlier chapters. See, the text is clear. This is Israel. It doesn't mean that it's the actual like physical Israel or even the nation as it existed. It's like a ideal future Israel, sort of the way that it's seen in other biblical texts, where you have this idealized nation of Israel that's going to come back, like the remnant that's going to come back. It's sort of that idea. But is that the case in Isaiah 53? It very well may not be one particular referent. It may not have a particular referent in mind. It's difficult. But was Zerubbabel or some of these? There are a couple different options that people have. I haven't studied Isaiah 53 and read the secondary literature enough to be able to make a to say anything comfortably about it, I guess.
Yeah. So that's interesting. See, I would say that the suffering servant's Jesus. Of course, I'm going to say that, and I would say the same thing on Psalm 22 and Zechariah 12:10. And I know you and I didn't talk about this today, but maybe some other time we could talk about the book of Daniel.
Yeah. So. No, and the thing is, like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. In fact, like if you were to ask Dr. Cook what he thinks, like he's going to say, yeah, sure. I mean, like Isaiah 7:14 is talking about an actual person there then that gives birth, to this kid. But, the sort of the stereotypical, there's a near referent and then a far referent. And, prophecy, I think that's perfectly plausible, right? I don't think it's true, but it's plausible. Right. Mm-hmm. I think that's and if it is true, like, if that is a prophecy, that's the way that it has, I think that's the way that it has to operate, because it's got to mean something to the person that's receiving the prophecy, the king that's receiving the prophecy then and there, it's got to mean something to him. But then if it's going to have an actual fulfillment later on, you've got this sort of two aspects. Mm-hmm. And he would argue, just real quick, because you said Daniel, he would argue this a similar sort of thing with the book of Daniel. So, he's going to see the book of Daniel written in the 2nd century. But that's not a problem for him. The way that he looks at, and I think it's again a fair way to look at it, is that there are these, he likens it in his book to driving up a mountain. Like, I guess Pikes Peak would be something similar to this. You're kind of like on the edge, sort of, and you can look over. And as you're going up the mountain, the car veers sometimes over toward the edge of the cliff. And you see over the edge, and it looks like you're getting ready to go over, and you see everything that's coming, and then you steer back and you continue up the mountain. And every once in a while you veer over. Well, he would look at that apocalyptic literature in the same way. So like when you have Jesus saying this generation will not pass, or you have Paul saying we who are alive and remain, it's not that they're lying, it's that, or that they were wrong. It's that the car veered over toward the edge and you could see the apocalypse coming. And God in his mercy brought the car back. That's kind of how, I hope I did that justice for him. He's probably listening and going, that's not what I meant, but I think it is. So
yeah, I love the apocalyptic literature. Actually, I have to say that's I was just reading, I'll just mention this really quickly. See, I was raised a Catholic, and Catholics sort of revere Mother Mary. And so I have this this remnant inside of me that still reveres Mother Mary and wants to investigate Mother Mary. And I was just reading about Revelation in 11 and 12, and they referenced this woman, this great woman who gives birth to a child, and it's clear reference to Mother Mary, but they put a crown on her head. So like she's the Queen Mother. And I thought of that. And then I read Brent Petry's book, and he basically talked about how in the ancient Near East, they had the Queen Mothers. A lot of the kings would have their Queen Mothers in place as the Queen at the time, like Saul and some other ones. And so I thought that was kind of a fascinating, he actually tied that up to Mother Mary and Jesus. And I thought, never thought
that's
of that.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of different. But Josh, how can people, I don't know if I put your stuff in the description yet, but I will. I'm going to put a link to your Digital Hammurabi channel. So you guys should go over there and subscribe and listen to his stuff. And I do listen to your stuff every once in a while, even though I do vehemently disagree with you on some things, but I do listen to your stuff. And Megan does a really good job putting those videos together. I wish I had that talent, because
me too.
Yeah, somebody told me yesterday, somebody totally ragged on me on Twitter, basically, because my videos are low quality compared to other people's. I'm like, I don't have the skills.
Believe me when I tell you, if anybody doubts this, go back and look at some of our early videos. Those were my production quality. Anything that looks, if you go to our channel and something looks good, thank Megan, because she's the one that takes my nonsense and sort of, okay, how about we do this to make it look a little bit better,
Yeah, plus you even created those little cartoons.
Yeah,
like little cartoon
people. I
even
messed that up. SJ, how could a person mess it up, you ask? Oh, I did. She drew them without legs because she was intending them not to have the bottom portion on screen. Right. Well, then I put them on screen and put the whole figure up there, and once they were up there, it was like, okay, well, we have to keep putting them up there like that because you started it. And it was like, oh,
that's so, because they're like Weeble Wobbles.
Yeah, that's like. So you can blame this guy.
The Weeble Wobbles. It's so funny. No, I like those though. I mean, I have to, and I like how you do the music too. And I mean, the whole thing is pretty well put together. So I'll give you that.
Thank you.
And I know you've got a couple books out. You want to tell anybody about your books? You got a book on slavery and Sumerian writing, right?
Yeah. If anybody wants to, I have these sitting here because I showed them last night on Shannon's channel. That's my book on slavery. If anybody wants to get it and tear it apart, go for it. Because I'm sure there are people in the side chat that would like to. And then one that everybody might be interested in is if you want to learn to read Sumerian. I figured I did all this work in Sumerian linguistics, so I might as well write an easy to understand guide to learning Sumerian. So they're both written at a very popular level. They assume that people know how to speak or read English, and that's it. So you don't have to know any grammatical terms. I teach them all to you in the book. So people seem to like it. So
yeah, that's good. And then you can find you're on Twitter and your wife's on Twitter too under Digital Hammurabi, but you kind of have to. You're DJ Hammurabi 1, right?
That's right. Yep. And she is if I
Yours is
remember the
different.
sub. It's
DIGI slash or
underscore. Yep. Underscore
underscore.
Hammurabi. That's right. Digi Hammurabi. Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, you
Nice.
guys go ahead and go find them there too. So,
Thank you,
so
Esther.
anything else you want to say, Josh, before we
No,
close it out?
I really appreciate the time and having me on. It's been great. It's been great. It
Yeah.
really has. I mean that.
Oh, good. Thank
So
you.
thank
So
you.
no, I enjoyed having you on. And so, yeah, and I'm willing to take people on if you guys want to come on here, anybody in the chat sometime and chat. I'm totally willing to have people on, and I try to keep it friendly as possible. So that's a good way to do it.
Right.
I don't like to bring people on and start heaping abuse on people. I actually went on somebody's channel and they started heaping abuse on me, and I thought I
Like,
clearly need to
whoa.
screen my channels. You know? That was a couple of years ago. I haven't done any of that since. I've had pretty good
Oh
experience.
gosh. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I'm very reticent to go into people's rooms, because I'm like, I don't I get all anxious. So no, but this is a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. It was nice.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you. So everybody, I'm trying to think. Sunday, I'm probably going to be with G-Man making a video. I have another plans. Next Friday, I'm going to be going on the Friendly Atheist channel. I think that's what we're doing. Yeah, next Friday at 4:00, I think it is, with Craig Reed. Actually, I'm not even
cool.
sure of the time. So we're gonna do that. So that's it. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, so end the stream. No, that's